Well, good evening, and thank you all for coming along to this Art After Hours talk for the Archibald Prize, which I think is, in the art world, the equivalent of Groundhog Day, really. It comes around every year, but this year we're looking at self-portraits, of which there seem to be quite a few in this year's exhibition. We're trying to count, there's either 8 or 9 out of the 41 or 40 entries, and we have 3 of the artists here today, Natasha, Ken and Rodney. And I guess the most obvious question I was asking people, what do you ask someone who's painted a self-portrait? And the first question that springs to mind, Natasha, of course, is why did you choose to paint yourself?
I think it's a very natural thing for a...
Nice and close.
Yeah, I think it's a very natural thing for a figurative artist to do. I always paint people that are quite close to me. I think it kind of brings a certain kind of intimacy into the work, and an intimacy that maybe couldn't be achieved with painting a stranger. So I guess making a self-portrait is really a sort of literal way of approaching that.
Ken, your reasons?
I've painted myself a few times. In a sense, I think you can be very honest when you make a self-portrait, although if you look carefully, you will see that I've in fact got slightly greyer hair than I painted in the picture that I made. But as Natasha says, in a sense you can be more honest and more direct about it. And I have had a number of self-portraits in the Archibald over the years, some very complicated ones, but now that I'm 70, I think it's important that the painting be simpler, because by the time you get to 70, you should have a clear understanding of where you are and maybe where you're going.
You say on the side of the painting that this portrait took you 70 years and 1 hour to paint.
Yeah, look, that's a lie. It took me 70 years and 5 minutes, basically. I did it twice. I held up a mirror and I made the painting quite swiftly, and it was not very good at all. And so I put the mirror down and I picked up the brush again and I made the painting a second time from my head, from my feeling. And I think it's a much better drawing, and then you have to simply walk away from it then, because there's nothing you can do to change it. That was it. It's a bit like a jazz musician. You need to know where all the notes are, but when you're actually making the drawing or the painting, it's like a performance. And I can assure you that my painting took very less time than both of my friends on the stage.
Well, Rodney's is a monumental work based on a Caravaggio, and it's not exactly a flattering portrait of your family life. I don't know those of you who have seen it. It depicts Rodney being decapitated by his wife, as his 2 children stand watching, one of them holding a sack ready for the head. Is that an intimate picture of as D.H. Lawrence called it, the domesticity, the slaughterhouse behind the front door?
Well, just on any average Sunday afternoon. What else you go?
And what made you choose that particular painting to emulate?
Well, it's one of the great paintings of the world, and Caravaggio is an artist who was very forthright in his time, and also, you know, he pushed a lot of boundaries and challenged challenged the status quo of portrait painting and figure painting by using the figures he did, using the prostitutes as models and his lighting. So he was someone I was very sort of fond of, and still am, because in my painting I'd like to say I've echoed Caravaggio, because I too used photographic methods in my painting, and we're trying to push a few boundaries, and so it seemed to be a natural sort of fit. Mine became a family sort of group rather than just a group of models, but so we just set it off like that, really.
I mean, I suppose the thing, Natasha, when you say that self-portraits can reveal an intimacy that's not there with necessarily the portrait of someone else, what aspect of your persona do you think it does reveal? Because sometimes, I mean, the perception of ourselves as we see ourselves is rarely how other people see us. What aspect of yourself were you trying to get? And we'll move on to the size of your picture, because I don't know, again, if you haven't seen it, but Natasha's picture is the size of a matchbox. Literally one of the smallest, if not the smallest painting ever entered in the Archibald.
Yeah, it actually is the smallest painting that's ever been hung in the Archibald in the 90 years.
Do you have a very small studio, or...?
No, I don't actually have a fairly large studio, but if I needed to, I could probably paint in the space of about 1 metre by 1 metre.
So why the choice to make it quite so small?
Well, what I really wanted to do was push the boundaries between scale and representational painting. I'm very much interested in the viewer-painting relationship. I've kind of been watching people view my work, and it's quite interesting to see people really getting up close to it, and it's also quite interesting the fact that people carry magnifying glasses around with them in their pockets.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, so basically with my painting, you really have to get up close to it, and what I'm really trying to do is create a one-on-one connection with the work. Yes, because the physical space is completely narrowed.
And what personal aspect of your own being did you think that illuminated?
Yeah, that's a kind of interesting question. In some ways, I think I could have achieved the same quality within the work with painting anybody, whether it be my brother or my sister. For me, I kind of always paint people in a somehow fragile state, and I guess what I really wanted to do was pay tribute to the beautiful miniature portraits that I'm truly inspired by.
Ken, your picture as well, it has a vulnerability and a fragility about it. It's not what one would normally associate with you, the sort of bright confidence. Is this, as you enter the autumn of your years?
Well, maybe late spring. I mean, you have to feel that there's a lot ahead of you. But the first picture that I entered in the Archibald Prize, or the first self-portrait, has in fact ended up in the National Portrait Gallery. It's a very complicated picture about a degree of, I wouldn't say fame, but certainly knowledge of what you do and the problems that sometimes brings to the painter. Because quite obviously the first things that people saw of mine were things that sought a very wide audience, because that's what I was doing and I needed to make some money to do what I wanted to do. I was 14 when I went to art school, but I was 40 when I had my first exhibition. I'd been painting all the time, so in the sense that I was ready. So this painting, the painting that's been hung, is a much simpler picture, but I think if you look at it, you can see all of the vulnerability of a person who there's more behind them than there is in front. But artists always die halfway through their life. There's never enough time to paint all the paintings that you want to paint. And so, in a sense, I hope the painting has got something of that feeling about it.
And Rodney, was it a conscious decision with your choice of picture? I mean, obviously people are going to read into that picture certain, well, they may draw certain conclusions about your personal life, or are you being sort of emblematic of the artist as a whole? I mean, I believe your wife is a curator of art. Is it the artist suffering at the hands of curators? Is it the artist suffering at the hand of family, or are we reading too much into it?
Well, there's a bit of play on all of that, but it's also about looking at, you know, freedom of speech, censorship, or how far you can take a self-portrait. There is that, you know, curator and artist, you know, obviously. But, you know, it's not meant to be, you know, you can read what you want into it. That's why I've done that, because people always ask questions about, well, what does a painting mean? And it means, you know, very much what the viewer wants to put into it. But that's, you know, that's, to me, the Caravaggio portrait was one of the most challenging, and it's also, And I think that in this day and age, well, just recently we're going to get Osama bin Laden's, people are debating, well, the White House is debating whether they're going to issue the photograph of bin Laden to say that he's really dead, and they're saying it's too graphic or something, So there's, and people are desensitised to violence. We've got our two sons that are sitting there, totally blasé to it. So it's also about that sort of thing. And recently there's been some issues on whether paintings should be censored, and this sort of thing. And I'd like to think that that's absolutely horrific if that happens. So hopefully it brings those sort of attentions. But basically, I think it's a painting that, that it is a family portrait. It is honouring Caravaggio, and it is of its time. It's a contemporary painting.
And does it reveal anything of you personally that you haven't mentioned so far?
No, I don't think so.
No intention there to do so?
No.
Fair enough. Getting back to you, Natasha, and the work, it's extraordinary because, it's almost, it's photorealism in a way, and ironically it's about the size of an iPod screen. I don't know if this is a generational thing or what, but just from a technical point of view, how do you achieve that sort of detail at that kind of scale?
I approach the work in a very similar way that I might approach a larger painting. I guess the basic difference is my equipment is scaled down to the ultimate.
Do the brushes have one bristle?
I've got a little more than one bristle. The size brush that I use is a -20 brush, which is the smallest possible brush that you can get. And in some cases, and with this Archibald painting, I actually had to use a pin to work with as well.
And Ken mentioned he tried the mirror and then abandoned that idea. How did you do it? Because the rules stipulate, I believe, that it has to be a live sitting, does it not?
Yes, it does. I primarily work from photographs, but to sort of go by the guidelines of the Archibald Prize, I had a mirror sitting next to me the whole time, and I was basically looking back and forth into the mirror to get certain kind of details, to get a certain eye colour or hair colour and that sort of thing. So I very much work from the photograph and the mirror.
Are you ever surprised? It's funny when you look in the mirror, as we all do every day at some point, but we tend to see ourselves from the front on. And sometimes if you catch yourself in profile, or if you catch in another mirror, you get a shock and you're surprised and you think, oh God, I hope I don't look like that, but I obviously do. Do you ever sort of catch surprising aspects of yourself when you do self-portraits that you didn't see yourself in that way, perhaps?
I did with mine. Because we were setting it up as a group photograph, and of course had to have many takes to get the image right, and I kept looking at the still shots that we were setting up, and you just, especially with the angle of my neck and the blade, and you see yourself in the most vulnerable and most flattering manner. But I think the camera is good from that point of view, because you think the camera doesn't lie supposedly, but you can manipulate it a little.
I was pleased to find we have one grandchild. She's 2. She had not seen the portrait in the studio at all, but my son and daughter-in-law brought her here a couple of days ago, and she looked at the picture and she said, "Granddad." So, it got through to somebody, and because other people around there were saying, "Oh, cute little kid saying granddad," and she was saying, "I love him." So you can't ask for more than that, You can't ask for more than that. If that comes out of the painting, that's fine for me.
Hopefully, she said, usually he's not that yellow.
Yeah. No, that's right. And I must
drink
say,
too much, does it?
I must say that Edmund rather unkindly at one stage said it looked a bit like Hitler. Well, I'm a much nicer person than Hitler, essentially.
No, I couldn't see
and,
Hitler.
I think that was a bit tough.
Natasha, did you discover anything unusual about yourself when you were doing the self-portrait?
I've painted myself so many times. I've done at least 20 self-portraits. So I'm very much used to the experience.
Now, obviously, you're a first-timer to the Archibald,
Yes,
and I believe this is maybe one of the first times you've had to talk about your work in public,
it is.
which may explain why most of it is being directed to the back wall there. But how do you find it dealing with this sort of whole circus aspect and something that is obviously a very personal and reflective discipline for you? How is it to suddenly be talking about this?
It's absolutely amazing and it's absolutely terrifying at the same time. Yeah, I don't know, what can I say? You know, I've only been out of art school for a couple of years and I've never had a solo exhibition in my life. I'm about to have my solo exhibition and opens in a couple of weeks in Melbourne, so I guess I'm at a very early point in my career.
And all works of a similar size?
Yeah, the exhibition is called Petite Genre and it contains 14 very small paintings.
Well, the miniature, I mean, historically, these were used, especially miniature portraits, were used as keepsakes or, you know, to travel with you. Has the age of photography sort of superseded the value of the miniature, and do you think it's time for the miniature to make a bit of a comeback?
Yeah, that's the thing, like the advent of the photograph basically destroyed the purpose of the miniature portrait. And I guess what I'm trying to do is revive that in a contemporary setting.
You were mentioning before, Rodney, that art commercially these days tends to be sold by the metre, by the square metre. Is that still true, and does it make it difficult for a miniaturist to sort of, you know, make a commercial go of it?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, it wouldn't matter it shouldn't matter in the secondary market, but I mean, one of the reasons, you know, I'll be a bit brashy why I started making big paintings in the 80s was because you got bigger prices for them. It was that simple. And I said to my dealer, well, what about something, this 2 foot or something? Oh, well, that's, you know, much less than something that... So artists kept doing them bigger and they keep doing them bigger. And there just seems to be that crazy price structure, which I think should, you know, I don't really see I think it has to change, you know, because obviously contemporary art is not just big pictures, it's also... but the market seems to be still that way, but I'd like to think that you could, you know, say in my next show that I'm doing some work that some of the smaller works take you longer to do, they're harder to do, and should be priced accordingly, so, yeah.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, the degree of difficulty in a smaller work, do you find it more difficult to do smaller works, Ken, or...?
The older I get, I want to do bigger works. I'm slightly different. I open my own gallery, which I think is like a chef owning a restaurant. It's like a chef owning a restaurant. It puts no one between you and the work. You either like it or you don't. And I guess the thing that interests me, it's always interested me to be doing pictures. Like on the back of my studio wall, on the door, I had a little sign about 10 years ago. It said painting for me. I had to remind myself that that's what I was doing. I painted over that and I have a very big sign now, and it's the same words, painting for me. I have to understand that that's what I can do now. I was going to say something before. Oh, I know. I was very pleased that this particular prize was judged by the trustees of the gallery and not by the toss of the coin and some kind of weird explanation. This is very hallowed ground. Any painter that's lucky enough to have their pictures in this gallery, I think that's a very serious and important act. And anybody that's given the opportunity to judge pictures to go into this particular space should take it very seriously.
Something occurred to me while you were talking then, and I forgot what it was.
It was that good, it just blew you right away.
After painting for me. Oh, yes. When you... this notion of nothing coming between you and the work as a gallery owner, as a portrait painter, when you paint other people, I'm always suspicious, you always suspect that in some way what that person thinks or will think of the painting informs your work. Now, is it easier to paint yourself because you don't have that, Or is it, ironically, more difficult to paint yourself because you'll be more critical of yourself?
In a way, it's easier. I mean, the other painting that I've had a picture of James Morrison and a picture of Glenn Murcutt, both good friends of mine. Now, Glenn's a wonderful architect, but like a lot of architects, he always likes to wear khaki. You know, he's a very khaki kind of person. And the top of Glenn Murcutt's head is like the top of one of the roofs in his building. And so and he's a very elegant and very simple man, so it deserved a very simple and kind of elegant portrait. But it's always a bit confronting when you show somebody the painting that you've made of them. I'm pleased to say that he liked it, and also that's ended up in the National Portrait Gallery. But I made a picture once of David Moore. And I made it like a big contact sheet, all in grey and white. On one side, 12 panels with 12 ways of looking at him, and the other one, a big picture of his head. He was a very imposing man. He had a terrifically craggy face. And when he came to the studio to look at it, it's a kind of confronting thing when you turn it round and you show somebody who's very involved with visual things. I don't think he liked it very much, basically. I don't think he liked it at all. But I actually quite like it. So,
but during the process of painting it, I mean, were you influenced by the potential reaction of him to it?
You don't worry. You don't give a bugger what someone thinks about it. You do it, you know, the way that you want to. But in a case of a guy like David Moore, where his photos are absolutely part of the Australian scene, and he has such a good, strong eye, and I explained to him the way that I wanted to do it. I think sometimes if you're dealing with other artists or people with a highly visual expectation, they might try and get a jump ahead of you, whereas you're actually going to come at it a different kind of way.
Rodney, have you ever had that experience painting other people?
Yeah, of course, a few times, and it's the most difficult thing you can do. That's why I think that self-portrait, I think all painting's impossible, you know, and portraits are probably close to sort of absolutely impossible, and painting somebody else, you're never going to get it right. But the people I've chosen tend to expect me to sort of, you know, slaughter them a bit or do something to them. So they've generally been happier with the result than I would have thought, you know. So, but if you can get the essence of the person you want and be true to yourself, that's why they're so difficult to do, you know. And people continue to do them. And you can use all sorts of techniques, you can photograph, you can do all sorts of and why a lot of the paintings, you know, that are just from photographs always look dreadful, there's a good reason for that, is that because they kill the life in them. You know, the way I'm working at the moment is I'm actually using photographs, so I'm not copying it, I'm actually using them, so it's a different thing. But so if you can get that essence of someone and be true to yourself, and if people are always going to see themselves in different light, they're not going to like that a lot, and you shouldn't worry about that. But generally, people do come round to them if it's a good painting, you know. And the only way you can do a good painting is be true to yourself, you know. And that's why a lot of the percentage of the portraits in the Archibald are dreadful. You know, because the artist's not true to themselves, and they're afraid of insulting the sitter. So it's a double lose, you know. So the sitter's got to be prepared for the artist to sort of say, hey, that's your work, that's what I want you to do. And the Archibald's a good venue for more contemporary portraiture. Only artists have to step up to the mark a bit, you know. It's slowly getting there, but it's such a great, you know, such a great sort of platform for it to be, you know, more contemporary. And there's plenty of artists out there that should have a go at it, I think, and, you know, let's see it happen.
And Natasha, was your sitter happy with the portrait you painted?
Yes, I was happy with the portrait. I think it was one of the best portraits that I've done in a miniature scale. Yeah.
Good. Well, that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the end of this discussion. Natasha, thank you very much, and I'm sure you'll have many more of these to endure in the future.
And good luck, Natasha, for your show. Huh?
Yes, good luck for the show. Ken, Rodney, thank you very much. If everyone could join us in thanking our three artists tonight.